All right, here's your homework on solving radical equations. So be aware what type of radical it is. If we have an even radical, we could have extraneous solutions. If it's an odd number radical, there is not. So here, we want to isolate the radicals. So we're going to subtract 5. So 12 subtract 5 is 7. And then to undo that, we're going to square both sides. So 7 squared is 49. Wait a second, I'm doing not the homework. That's question 1 from the lesson. Anyway, the answer is still 49. Let me turn to the homework part. All right, step 1 is to isolate the radical. So that's 3 minus 2v. We're going to subtract. So 20 subtract 17 is 3. Then we're going to square both sides. So we have 3 subtract 2v equals 9. Then we're going to solve that. So I'm going to add 2v and subtract 9 and then divide. And I get the answer negative 3. Just because the answer is negative doesn't mean it's extraneous. If I plug it into the equation, you can see a negative 2 times negative 3 will be a positive 6. And then you could go from there. So 3 plus 6 is 9, square root of 9, and so on and so forth. That's a good solution. Number 2, isolate the square root part. Square both sides. So 13 times 13 is 169. Divide by, add 11. And when you divide, you get 45. What did I do here? When you subtracted 15, you got negative 13. Can the square root of any number equal a negative number? No. So right now we know there's no solution. Let's not do extra stuff here. You could see this, but if you plug that answer back in, it's not going to work. So as soon as you see a square root that's isolated and it's equal to a negative number, you know right away there's no real solution. The solution can only be imaginary. All right, number 3. Again, an even root, so I need to be careful. So the first step is I need to divide by negative 7. So there is no even root that could equal negative 2. It can only be a positive answer. So that means right away there's no solution. Number 4, isolate the radical part. So I'm going to add 11, so I get 6. So I'm glad that it equals a positive number because the square root cannot equal negative. So we're good. Square both sides, subtract 7, and you get your answer, and that's a good solution. Number 5, recognize we have a cube root, and so all answers are good, positive and negative. So there's no extraneous for a cube root. So we're going to add 7. That's going to give me 6. And then I'm going to cube both sides. So this will be 6 cubed to undo it. And that answer, 6 times 6 times 6 is 208. No, 216. So we have 16p plus 8 equals 216. Subtract 8. Now you get 208. Divide by 16 and you get 13. And that's a good solution. Here, isolate the square root. So we're going to subtract and then we're going to divide. So it's good that it's equal to the square root or the cube root. The square root is equal to positive 8, so that's good. So there's not any extraneous solutions there because the square root can't equal a positive number. Square both sides. Subtract 10 and divide. Number 7. Be careful of these. Square root equals square root. If you get an answer and you plug it back in, it gives you a negative answer underneath the square root sign, then there's no solution. So here we would square both sides, or just take both insides and make them equal to each other. When I combine like terms, I get 5k, add 29, and I get 70. So when I divide, I get 14, When I plug 14 into either one, I get a positive number underneath the square root sign, which is what I want. If you plugged it back in and got a negative number under the square root sign, then we cross it out. No solution. All right, here we're going to cube underneath. Now it can be any number here, so this one does not have any extraneous. So they share the same radical. Just put the what's underneath equal to each other. Add x, add 21, and then divide, and you have your answer. Turn the page. Here's one where we'll square both sides, but you'll get a 25 on the right. Be careful. So as you do that and get 25x and then combine like terms and solve, the issue here is that when you plug in 4, you're going to get a positive answer on the left and you're going to get a negative answer on the right. They don't equal each other. So that can't happen. So there's no solution here. So when you take this solution and you plug it in, you get a positive answer on the right side and a negative answer on the right side. So again, be careful of the even roots. Here, if you take it to the, I'd multiply both sides by 2 to begin with. And then I would raise it to the power of 4. So by doing that, the radical is undone. 2 to the 4 is 16, and then the radical is undone. Just make sure you distribute. So when you do that, it's 16w minus 32. And then combine like terms. So we'll subtract 7. We'll add 32. And when you divide, you get the answer 3. Number 11. We're going to square both sides. Now this is going to end up in a radical answers, a radical equation. So for radical, we need to make it equal to 0. So we're going to add 2x and subtract 63. We got to be careful here. We can't have any negative answers because the square root can't equal a negative number. So that when I factor this, plus 9 and minus 7, I recognize that x cannot equal negative 9. Because if I plug negative 9 in, you now have the square root of a number equaling negative 9. So the only answer there is 7. So we call this one extraneous, negative 9. An extra solution. Number 12, we're going to square both sides. So you have n squared, 12 subtract n. Again, we need to be careful of the same thing. We're going to add n and subtract 12 so that when I factor this, and I get my two solutions, know that negative 4 is extraneous and positive 3, that's the only good answer. Because we have the square root of something equaling n can't be negative. You can't have the square root of a number equaling a negative answer. So the only solution that works is 3. 13. Square both sides. Be careful of the right side. You need to FOIL. So this is really w subtract 3 and w subtract 3, so it's w squared, and then you make sure you FOIL it all the way through. Then it's a quadratic, so we're going to combine like terms. So negative 5 and negative 6 is negative 11. Add 15 and it's 24. So we have w minus 8, w minus 3. So then we got to check, is 8 and 3 good? So when I plug in 3 take away 3 is 0. You can have the square root of 0 equals 0. Can't be negative, but it can be 0. 8 also gives you a good answer. It's a positive number on the right side. Both are good solutions. Here again, we got to be careful. We're going to square. So it's c plus 4 and c plus 4. So on the right side, you have 6c plus 15. On the right, we need to FOIL. So make sure you completely FOIL this properly. And then we're going to make it equal to 0. So we have c squared, 8 take away 6 is 2, and 16 take away 5 is 1. We're going to factor this, so it's 1 and 1. So the only answer here is negative 1. When I plug negative 1 in, it's fine. You have a positive answer on both sides. All right, last two. Can you solve a radical equation? So step 1 is to isolate the radical, so I'm going to subtract 7, and then I'm going to square both sides. So I have 41 subtract 8a. I have to FOIL this, so I'm going to get this answer when I FOIL it. And then it's a quadratic, so it needs to be equal to 0. So negative 7 and negative 7 is negative 14, plus 8 is negative 6. 49 and subtract 41 gives me 8. So when I get this, I get 8 subtract 2, a subtract 4. So the two answers are positive 2 and positive 4. Now, part of the issue here is when you plug in 2 and when you plug in 4, you can't get an answer because whatever positive answer you get here, if you add 7 to it, it's impossible to get 2. And if you add 7 to a positive number, it's impossible to get 4. So both are bad. There is no solution here because of the setup. And you could also see it here. If you put in a 2 take away 7 and 4 take away 7, it gives you a negative number, and the square root cannot equal a negative number. All right, last one here. Square both sides. Now, be careful to FOIL the right side. So that this, when you square it, is simple. But this one, the square root does not go under the 7. So we have to FOIL this. Now, I'm going to combine. Notice we have one q on the right and another q on the left. I'm going to combine the q's together so that I have 14 and the square root of q. I'm going to subtract 49. And when I subtract 49, I get negative 70. And then when I divide, I know something's happening here. So when I divide, I get the square root of q is equal to a negative number. So that's impossible. So there's no solution that could give you where the square root of a number is equal to negative 5. Anyways, good job practicing your homework with me. Mr. G Math, over now.